Hello and welcome to the Patreon channel of True Crime Rocket Science. In today's episode, we're starting a brand new 15-part series on the Atkinson Transcripts. In today's episode, we'll be dealing with 12 pages of the interview Nicole Atkinson made with CBI agent Zentner, Greg Zentner, and it spans 540 lines, 12 pages. It seems like a lot, but as you'll probably see, that it's not going to really take that long to get through. Before we get there, I want to briefly deal with something that came onto the True Crime Rocket Science YouTube channel comment section. Just out of the blue, people started commenting about one of the very early things True Crime Rocket Science addressed way back, in September and October, just really months and months, over a year ago, and that was, where this crime occurred, and it was obviously in response to someone from another channel challenging this notion, saying, the kinetic app data just absolutely shows exactly where Shan'ann was, and blah blah blah, and these comments had nothing to do with the coverage of the particular videos. It was just people coming on to the TCRS channel to, I don't know what they were trying to do, undermine, second guess, challenge, question, whatever. But the tone of the questions were just a little bit irritating, because people would say things like, were you aware of the iPhone data? I guess you didn't know about it. Well, True Crime Rocket Science covered it as early as November the 25th, 2018. That's like less than a week after the discovery was released, right? So very early on, within 6 days of the discovery being released, it was up on CrimeRocket. It included the digital evidence analysis of the iWatches, the kinetic data logs, and the bar charts. It's the 28th tranche in the archive that CrimeRocket published. And then less than a month later, there's a guest post on this, also on CrimeRocket, titled "The Most Overlooked and Crucial Pieces of Evidence Related to Establishing a Timeline of Events That Night." So True Crime Rocket Science knew about it, studied it, evaluated it months and months ago. I've got a feeling I know how this cropped onto people's radars now. The TCRS channel has been expanding, and I've recently changed the title page of the YouTube channel. And if you're completely new to my work and you haven't read a single blog and you haven't read a single book, and you read the title of the title post, it says, "In the first chapter of the first narrative of the Two-Face series, a scene was sketched for a premeditated murder that took place moments after Shan'ann set foot in her home." And I think the idea of whoever saw that, whoever came by the channel to just snoop around, was like, oh, well, I see this video was viewed 51,000 times. I'm going to debunk it, and maybe my video is going to get a lot of views. I don't know if that was the intention, but it sort of feels like it. And it is very reductionist to say, well, the only reason the crime happened where it did was because the iPhone data shows that or proves that, or that the Vivint data shows that or proves that. It doesn't. If that were the case, you could have a court case, and you could just say something like that in sort of one sentence, and then have the case go to the jury. And I'm not being facetious when I say that, because we've just had the Patrick Frazee trial. You also had CCTV surveillance footage, and it's the same kind of thing. The footage isn't absolutely clear. It's clear that Frazier's entering the home, and it's clear that he's there at the crime scene, but you can't see what he's got in his hands. You can't see whether he's got blood on his clothing. You can't see him removing the victim's body. And so even though it's quite compelling, it's not enough. And that's why you need this sort of, this whole mosaic of evidence. And that's what I try to do in terms of sketching the crime scene in terms of the Watts home. So it's not enough just to look at the Vivint data. It's not enough to look at just the iWatch data. You need to look at all the data together and then come up with a scenario. For me, it's a little bit tedious doing this because I've already done it. I've already addressed this on the blog, in the books, and exhaustively with people who've not followed it, not agreed with it. And I don't know what you guys think, but my opinion is that you kind of have two schools of thought here. You have the true crime rocket science school of thought, and I don't know whether other people follow it. I mean, if there's anyone else, let me know. But as far as I know, true crime rocket science is alone in this theory. But the theory that the children were already murdered, and then Shan'ann was murdered, and then all the bodies were taken to the well site and then disposed at the well site, right? That's one theory. The other theory is basically what Chris Watts has said, which is that Shan'ann arrived home, the children were still alive. Chris Watts spoke to Shan'ann. She got into bed. They had sex. He murdered her. I don't know whether you want to include the attempted murder of the children, but let's say you do. Then he goes to the driveway, and you have the shadow on the driveway. That's now again your smoking gun evidence that the children were alive. And then all of this plays out then again at the well site where the children, I don't know, either are killed or the children are put down the hatch alive. So it's the one scenario versus that other scenario, and that other scenario is kind of all kind of part of the whole YouTube community. And I don't know whether, if one actually challenges that scenario, are those people really going to be convinced because they're convinced of a lion in the driveway being a child? So is a proper argument going to convince them? I'm not convinced that it is. But in terms of my Patreon page, I just want to know, would you guys want to walk through that again and just see how True Crime Rocket Science came up with that original scenario? Or I just sort of feel like it's a little bit tedious for me, and it's territory I've covered over and over and over again, and it's been dealt with, it's been done. But if you guys don't think so and you confused or whatever it is, then I can go through it again, and we can start with the sort of the very, very beginning, which is where the very, very beginning where you deal with a crime like this, which is what happened when Shan'ann entered the door, and that is where the first book starts off. I would really recommend, if you really want to know more at this stage, buy a book, buy one of the books in the 10-part series. If the first book, if you learn something from the first book, buy the second book. If you feel like your insights have grown, buy the third book, kind of thing. And if you disagree with it, then say so on this channel and we can deal with it. But if somebody says something like, I don't know whether you knew about this, it's not someone who's very informed about True Crime Rocket Science, and I'm not sure how informed they are about the Chris Watts case. And I don't know whether that's a snarky comment. I mean, are you honestly asking if I wasn't aware of it? I mean, have you ever been on True Crime Rocket Science? Have you ever been on the blog? So it's hard to sort of think that someone is asking it in a sincere way and that they really want an honest debate. And that's why I'm a little bit reluctant to have a sincere debate, because it feels like one's sort of just being provoked into it. To me, it just seems really obvious. But we can, if there are people who want to go into it, we can. We can go to starting with the September 26th post, an analysis of the blinds of the Chris Watts home. And let me just ask you guys, why do you think that would be important? When you're trying to establish where the crime happened, why do you think it would be important to look at the blinds and the configurations of the windows in the Watts home? Okay, and since 10 minutes have gone by, I think it's time to end that rant and get to today's episode. First of all, I want to thank the 66 patrons on this page already. So great to have you guys here. I'm getting very nervous that the subscription is going to go up to 500. I really don't want to do a live. I'm quite shy. Don't really want to show my face on YouTube. There's some people that think I'm more than 60 years old and I don't know what not. So I don't know. YouTube is scary enough as it is without putting one's face out there. For me, just putting my voice out there is as far as I really want to go. So yeah, I'm wanting more subscribers or patrons on Patreon, but I'm scared of getting to $500 because I don't want to do the YouTube live that I've committed to if we get there. But if we do get there, well, I'll be happy to talk to you guys and to interact. But let's get started with today's new series, the Atkinson Transcripts number 1. On the night of August 14th, 2018, CBI agent Greg Zentner was dispatched to Boulder to interview the most crucial witness in the Watts case. The transcript that I'm going to read out is an excerpt from a 72-page document spanning 3,223 lines of text. CrimeRocket is the first to reproduce and analyze this critical transcript in depth. The entire transcript has been broken down into 15 sections. The first part, and the part that I'm going to cover today, includes Shan'ann waiting outside the house on the porch for Nicole to pick her up so as to not wake the children. This was when she departed early in the morning for the Arizona trip. Then also Nicole's concern and suspicion around Shanann's purse right in the beginning. And then also Nicole's first text to Shan'ann on Monday, August 13th at 08:43 and again at 08:55. What was that text and what were the circumstances surrounding that? Before we deal with the actual transcript, just a couple of background, just a couple of points to provide a background. First of all, don't you find it interesting that Nicole Atkinson was actually working on the night of August 14th? You know, she'd actually told her followers on Facebook that she'd quit her job and that she was doing Thrive full time and that she'd won a car bonus. So it turns out Nicole wasn't just thriving. She was actually working effectively 2 jobs, the multi-level marketing and then her job as a nurse, as far as I'm aware, working the night shift. And when the original call came through from Frederick Police Department that they wanted to interview her, you could actually hear her husband shouting over the phone, and there was quite a lot of drama that they felt like she was in trouble, that they were almost treating her like a suspect. And so there was kind of a sense of resistance that they didn't really want to talk to the police anymore. And also that Nicole had to be at work, and she was just sort of quite rattled, I guess, by what was going on. Obviously it was starting to reverberate across the media. Journalists were probably accosting them as well, and it was getting to be a stressful situation. Obviously when the interview was conducted, Nicole was completely friendly and cooperative. And her, the time that she gave, as I say, spans 72 pages. So it was a very long interview, and also very useful, very insightful, very helpful. And so this interview was actually recorded, and you can actually listen to the recording if you're interested. I'm not going to play the recording here except to just read the transcript and then analyze sections of it. So it starts off with Agent Zentner saying hello, and them exchanging hellos. He asks Nicole, are you Nicole? And then she says, well, I'm going to step out for a minute, yeah. And then he identifies himself, Greg Zentner, with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. And Nicole, I don't know if she was expecting the police, but she just says, okay. And then he says, I just talked to you on the phone a few minutes ago, so can we go down to the little conference room on the end here? This is obviously at her place of work. And Nicole says that's fine. And then she asks him, how you liking the weather? And that's just typical Nicole, just very, just what you see is what you get. And Zentner said it's raining like crazy. So that's something to bear in mind, is that on the 14th, bear in mind the bodies were still not recovered at this point. It was raining, in Zentner's words, raining like crazy. And so even when you're talking about the blood alcohol levels of Shan'ann, you can kind of factor in the fact that it was raining, that water may have been a factor in the chemical reactions that happened. And then so we're already done with page 1 of 12, and then he asks Nicole to spell out her name, and there we see that it's Nicole, different to Nicole Kessinger, which is Nichol. And then he asks her about her last name, and then she says, do you want my married name or the one that's on her driver's license? And what's quite interesting, she says something about my married one that happened a month ago. Now, I'm not sure whether she got married shortly before this, or whether she changed her name. Not quite clear. In any event, she says that on her driver's license is the name Utoft. Now, something that I find quite interesting with true crime is how some people use different names to, I guess, confuse the public, or certainly just make it difficult to find out who a person is. So when Crystal Lee Kenny testified in the Frazee trial, she identified herself as Crystal Lee, but Lee is the name of her ex-husband. So it is actually Crystal Kenny. That's her name before she got married. You could say that she liked her married name, but fact is she was no longer married to her ex-husband. So if you try to find her in that way, you might have difficulty finding her. There's something similar in a way with Sandy Honorati and even Shanann's name, Shan'ann King, and the apostrophe and changing names just in slight and subtle ways. So in this case, the agent is quite careful just to get her name correctly, and he asks her to spell her name, Utoft, and she says that should change tomorrow, hopefully, to Atkinson. So her, not sure if it's her maiden name or from her first marriage, but that's one of the reasons why in some cases she was identified as Nicole Utoft, and otherwise Nicole Utoft Atkinson or Nicole Atkinson. But it can be quite disorientating very early on when you have these names changing like that. And in the Watts case, there are quite a few things like that. There's Nico with a C and a K. There's quite a few Nicoles. There's quite a few Nikkis, and so on. And then he confirms the number and confirms her home address, which was in Firestone, which is where one of the big Anadarko explosions occurred in 2017. And then she gives her date of birth in 1981. And then there's a little bit of discussion around Shan'ann, and she says you pronounce it like shenanigans. And what's quite interesting is just how many people in the beginning struggled to pronounce Shanann's name. And even when you go into the court narrative where Sandy talks in court and her father, they tend to say Shan'ann, especially her father calls her Shan'ann. So one wonders what sort of happened there. Did Shan'ann feel that she wanted to be independent? Did she change her name for some other reason? And it's interesting that Nicole Atkinson said it took 2 years to get the pronunciation of Shanann's name right. And Zentner then says he's also heard it as Shan'ann. And then he says, I've heard this, that, and the other. So again, you just have this weird thing. Just on something as simple as a name, there's all this uncertainty. Next, Zentner just goes into their backstory a bit. He asks, are you and Shan'ann pretty good friends? Is that correct? And Atkinson says, yes, we hang out a lot. We have kids the same age, so their kids play together. And then she says, I met her because her mom started working for me. So Sandy started working for Nicole when I was running a whole bunch of salons and decided to change professions. So now we'll already get a very interesting backstory here. We see that Nicole got to know Shan'ann through her mother first. And so Nicole actually knows Sandy quite well, and Sandy knows Nicole quite well. This explains why Nicole was on the phone to Sandy on that sort of, on speakerphone at the crime scene because they knew each other so well, because they'd had direct experience with one another so well. That's why that happened. It also shows how, in a way, Nicole has struggled a little bit to find her place in the sort of career world. She's tried this and she's tried that. She's worked as a nurse, she's worked as a hairdresser, and she's trying to survive. And in a way, Shan'ann was too. Shan'ann had also tried different things and was just trying to make ends meet. And then Zentner asks, how long have you known Shan'ann? And then Nicole answers 3 to 4 years. And so it's obviously in the time that Shanann's parents stayed with them for almost a year and a half, for those 15 to 16 months. That was basically when she met Shanann's mother and when she basically started her friendship with Shan'ann. So it was around about that time, which is probably around about early or mid 2015. So I think it was closer to 3 years that they knew each other than 4. On to the next page, and then the children are introduced, Bella and Celeste, and she goes by the name Cici. Yeah, you also have a different spelling of the name. In this report it's spelled C-I-C-I, if you can believe that. And just to show how well how well acquainted Nicole is with the Watts family, she can tell the investigator that Cici turned 3 in July. Of course, she also probably knew this based on Shan'ann sharing it on Facebook. I'm not going to cover Nicole's children. I just think that's sort of private information. And so if we go on to the next page, going to point number 204, the agent asks, what is Thrive? I've heard about that. I don't know exactly what that is. And Nicole answers, these patches that we wear. And one supposes that she's wearing one at the time. That's why she says these. So one can almost imagine she's pointing it out. And she calls it a nutritional supplement. And that it's not just patches, but that's the gist of it. And she asks, do you want more information? And the agent says, well, I've heard of it. I just don't know what it is. So Nicole sort of repeats, well, it's just a nutritional supplement. And obviously this is not a situation to promote Thrive or to try and sell the cop on the patches. So she's just trying to be as factual as possible. And she says, it just time releases vitamins and minerals into your body all day long, so it gives you like mental clarity and energy. And she says, Nicole adds, you actually stop craving stuff that you normally would want, like ice cream. She says, I don't crave ice cream anymore. And drinking soda, she says, I don't drink coffee. And then they get back to Shan'ann and the pronunciation. And Zentner confirms, were you guys together in Thrive? And Nicole says, yes, it's a home-based business, like Mary Kay, where it's a direct sales thing. On to the next page, Nicole says, so she actually, when I went to Cece's birthday party 2 years ago, Shan'ann gave me a sample, and then I went over to her house and we had play dates and whatnot for a year. We'd go to lunch or whatever, here or there, like girlfriends do. And then a year ago, I finally decided to try it. After the sample she gave me, so I was like, okay. I texted her and was like, I'm going to try it. And she's like, okay. And then, like by day 2, I went over and signed up to be a promoter. So it seems like she became a promoter within 2 days, but then it took her quite a lot longer to do it full time, in inverted commas. Nicole also says, I actually felt what it was doing for me, so I was like, and she said, you just be a customer. And I'm like, no, I'm going to talk about it. I want to make money off of it. So it's quite interesting that Shan'ann seemed to think of Nicole just as a client. She didn't really think of her as a fellow promoter, and Nicole ended up becoming quite a prominent promoter in Shan'ann's downline. I think it even surprised Shan'ann. I think it even surprised Nicole. So they were in that together, and then at 293, Nicole refers to flying out together and flying back together, obviously from Arizona. And so Nicole provides a bit of information that the top leaders of the company were going to be there. It was going to be at the Embassy Suites in Arizona, and then Nicole provides a interesting description of them leaving. Nicole says, I left here at 4 o'clock on Friday morning, so it was Thursday night, Friday morning, and I drove from here to her house and picked her up, and then we drove to the airport. So that's quite a kind of a confusing way to put it. She says, I left here, meaning she left her work, I'm assuming, on Friday morning. So it sounds like she left Boulder at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then drove to Frederick to pick Shan'ann up, and then from there they went to the airport. So it sounds like, when she says Thursday night, well, I think it was she left home she left home on Thursday night, came to work, and then went from work to this conference, which just shows you how, in a way, overworked Nicole had to feel, just going on this trip, having worked, pulled an all-nighter. That's what it sounds like. And then and also just for Shan'ann, she got a really early start. She was picked up quite early, and we know from the discovery that Shan'ann wasn't feeling very well when Nicole picked her up. She said she feels weak when she stands. Remember that? And so even in that case, Shan'ann didn't drive her own car to the airport. She got a lift, so there wouldn't need to be any parking. Chris Watts didn't take her to the airport because he would need to drive back to get his truck. And so Nicole says that she picked Shan'ann up at 4:30 in the morning. So it's a really, really early start for her. She must have left even before anyone else was awake. And the agent asks, did you guys have a really early flight? And Nicole says 7 o'clock. So the flight out was at 7, and they probably got to the airport around about 5:30 or so. And they flew Southwest Airlines. And she said, I can show you the boarding passes if you want. They're on my phone. And then they flew to Scottsdale, Phoenix. And I think the airport was Sky Harbor. And interestingly, the agent comes back and he says, so you picked her up on, was it Thursday? And Nicole answers, Thursday. And then he comes back and says, what day was Thursday? The 9th, is that right? And then Nicole says, oh no, it was Friday morning. It would have been the 10th. And so there's just clarification there that it was August the 10th at 4:30 a.m. that Nicole went to pick up Shan'ann, and that was the day that it was that morning at about 6 o'clock that Shan'ann let Chris know that she felt weak when she was standing. Okay, and to be clear, I think the reason why Shan'ann felt weak was because Watts had given her or slipped her some kind of large dose of oxy in her shake. And she may have just taken a sip, maybe she'd vomited after that, who knows. But what's an interesting thought is maybe Watts just wanted to bring about a miscarriage. I don't think he was trying to murder Shan'ann by putting the oxy in her shake at that point. And so you almost have this idea that if Shan'ann did have a miscarriage, then the rest of the crime wouldn't have been necessary. In other words, if Nico had either been aborted or miscarried, then the 3 people in his family wouldn't have died. I'm just saying it's a thought worth considering. And then because he couldn't kill Nico, he felt he had to kill Shan'ann, and because he killed Shan'ann, he felt like he had to kill everybody. It's kind of a very weird way of thinking, but it does seem to be the way that he thought about it, doesn't it? So Nicole confirms that they got to the airport at around about 5 o'clock, and that she picked Shan'ann up at 2825 Saratoga. And what's quite interesting here as well is the habit of, when Nicole and Shan'ann were doing things together, you have this protocol between them. And so one of the things Zentner asked is, so when you picked her up, did you go inside? And Nicole says no. And then she says, well, why didn't you go inside? And she says, well, I waited out in front because the kids were sleeping. And so you already have a clear protocol that the kids are very important. It's very important that they not be woken up. And that's why one can also assume that when Shan'ann arrived home, she wouldn't want to wake the children. She wouldn't want to turn lights on. She would want to close the door quietly. She'd want to slip into bed quietly. And so if you also imagine that the kids were sleeping when Shan'ann arrived home, you can imagine some kind of scuffle with Chris Watts where Shan'ann may have, had a hand clamped over her face. Wouldn't she have cried out, even if it was a muffled cry? And wouldn't that have disturbed the children if they were sleeping? And wouldn't that have caused the danger of them running around screaming, and that screaming waking the neighbors, and that then alerting others to a crime having taken place? But the other important thing with this protocol was the fact that Chris Watts knew that Nicole would probably not come into the house. And I'm talking about when Nicole dropped her off, just because, not just in terms of the airport, taking her to the airport, but just what had happened before. What was their routine? What was the habit? How often did Nicole come into the house when she dropped Shan'ann off? That kind of thing. Also bear in mind that Chris Watts didn't need to be sitting at the door, looking through the door to see what was going on. All he had to do was look at the footage on his phone of what the Ring doorbell camera was showing him. Who was entering the house? Was it just Shan'ann? I'm talking about that night. Was it just Shan'ann or Nicole? And so you would have seen the car in the drive. You would have seen Shan'ann walking on her own up to the front door. And so amazingly, Shan'ann was actually waiting on the front porch when Nicole arrived. She wasn't actually inside the house. She was actually waiting on the front porch. And again, all of this was in an effort not to wake the children. I don't think she wanted Nicole to pull up on the driveway. She just wanted to, because if the children had woken up, it would wake Chris Watts up, and it would just, start the day off not very well for everybody. Also, if they'd woken up, Shan'ann might have difficulty leaving. Part of it was that the children seemed to have kind of separation anxiety. When Shan'ann left, they would be in tears, and we saw that same separation anxiety when Chris Watts brought the babysitter. He sort of had to trick them into leaving. He sort of had to leave surreptitiously, which is also quite an interesting aspect in the psychology. And so what was also interesting was Chris Watts wasn't there to bid his wife goodbye. He wasn't there to help carry her bags. He wasn't there. No one was there. It was just Shan'ann on her own leaving, and obviously Shan'ann on her own when she got back, that fateful night. Then he asked what she was carrying, to go on the plane, and Nicole said just a carry-on suitcase and her purse. And so Zentner asked, do you remember what color the carry-on luggage was? Nicole answered it was black, and then she said it's in the house, sitting right by the stairs. And Zentner said, well, he didn't know that. Is it? I haven't been in there. And Nicole confirmed that it was. It's just sitting there. Nicole went on to describe it as black with some patent leather on it. And now we're on to the next page, page 11. And Nicole is sort of describing it in more detail now. It was sitting in the who all could have been in the house the last 2 days, but it was sitting right by the stairs. And when we went in yesterday, so that's something that she really picked up on. And it's unfortunate that it doesn't seem to have been really emphasized by anyone else. We don't see any of the body cam footage really turning down and like someone kneeling down and really examining the suitcase, examining what is around it. I mean, this was the last moment we know of Shan'ann. The last moment she was seen, she walked into the house with the suitcase, and then the suitcase remained at the bottom of the stairs. That's the last moment we know for sure where Shan'ann was, at the bottom of the stairs, about to head up the stairs. The bag never made it up the stairs, her purse never made it up the stairs, but it's hard to know whether it normally would have. Wouldn't her phone have been, or charger been in her purse? And then Zentner asked her about the purse. What kind of purse was it? Nicole answered a Dolce & Gabbana, like a beige color. So sounds like quite an expensive bag, designer bag. And then Nicole says, I found it in her office when we went through the house. Okay, and so this is really interesting that it wasn't the police who found it. It wasn't Chris Watts or her son who found it. It was Shan'ann's friend, Nicole, who found the purse in the office when they went through the house. And one's also got to wonder, how did the purse get there? Did Shan'ann put the purse in her office? I don't think that's right. I don't think that's what happened. Did one of the police officers put it there? I don't think that's true. Did Chris Watts put the purse in her office, and that I think is true. And maybe one's got to ask, when did he put it there? Did he put it there on the night of the crime? Did he put it there before he left? Did he put it there when he ran through the house? He certainly didn't retrieve her purse from her car. When he went in, one would have seen it. So possibly he retrieved it from upstairs and ran downstairs and put it in the office, or possibly he retrieved it from just somewhere else in the house, possibly the kitchen, or where could it have been? Could it have been in the basement? Could the purse have been in the basement? And what's very interesting is that Nicole says it was right inside the door, in terms of the office door. So in other words, that's where someone might put it if they're in a rush. And one could say that Shan'ann put it there, but it's also possible that Chris Watts put it there in a rush. Why would Shan'ann put her purse right inside, just inside the door? Why wouldn't she put it on a desk or something like that? It's hard to know what she normally did, but it's certainly an interesting thing to look at. And so at this point the agent says, well, look, you just tell the story as you want to, and let's just sort of muddle through this. And so at this point, and this is on page 12, the last page of this episode, Nicole starts sort of freely telling her story, right? And Zentner says, well, I'll interrupt if I have a question. And so Nicole says, kind of in her own words, just being herself, she says, I was concerned because normally when we come back from these conferences, she harasses me, meaning Shan'ann. And I don't want to say harassed me, but she harasses me the next day, like, come on, let's call people, let's get things going, let's work business. And she didn't call or she didn't text that morning. Like, usually I have text messages between 6:30 and 7:30 from her if she wants to do business or wants to get together or whatever. It's quite early. It's obviously when the kids wake Shan'ann up, she will be sort of up, and if she's ready to take them to school, to kindergarten, then once that's done, then Shan'ann would be ready and available to work. And so Nicole continues saying, I had signed up a new promoter over the weekend, and so we had plans to go to lunch with her, with this new promoter, at 1:30. And I woke up at like 7:45 that morning, and I didn't hear anything from her. I thought it was odd, but I know we were both tired, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. And then I woke up and I still hadn't heard anything from her. So I texted her. Like I said, I can show you the text. And so Zentner asks, can you show me the text? And so Nicole skims through them, and she says, Shan'ann's usually at the top. And then she said, I texted her yesterday morning at 8:43 a.m. So basically an hour after she woke up the first time, she texted her saying, how are you? And then Nicole texted her again around about 12 minutes later saying, I just wanted to see if you were okay. I know you were hurting a lot last night. I hope you're okay. And that was the second and the last text she sent Shan'ann just before 9 o'clock on that Monday morning. And of course Shan'ann wasn't okay, and she had gotten seriously hurt. She'd been killed. Nicole continues saying she's 15 weeks pregnant, and she was having a lot of migraines over the weekend, and she was tired. She wasn't eating because of what was going on, and they were pushing food on her and water because she was dehydrated and not eating like she normally does. And I presumed it had to do with what was going on with Chris. And once again, Nicole's intuition is spot on. It did have something to do with Chris. If Chris was poisoning her, trying to bring about a miscarriage, then Shan'ann would have migraines, she would feel tired, she would be out of sorts, she would be nauseous, she would not be eating the way that she normally did. She would also be dehydrated. So it does look like when Shan'ann flew out, Watts had put something in her shake, and it did have some effect on her, besides the emotional effect that everything was having on her. And so the agent slows Nicole down, and just wants to get back to the migraines and just emphasize that part of the story. And that brings us to the end of the transcript for part 1. We'll be back on Wednesday to do part 2, and coming up in the next week or so, we'll still be dealing with the enmity against the Ruseks, that's dealing with Cindy Watts, and the dynamic between Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger that everyone's missing. Is someone helping Chris from the outside? And then we'll get to episode 2 again of the Atkinson transcripts. Bear in mind, my next book, my 95th book, will be coming out probably on Monday on the Patrick Frazee case. It's just emerged that the Crystal Kenny trial, where she will be sentenced, will come out around about, the trial will be heard on the 28th of November. It's just a question of whether she'll get the full 3 years for evidence tampering, or half of that, or some other sentence. It's also just emerged the jailhouse snitch notes written by Patrick Frazee have just appeared in the media. You can head to CrimeRocket2.com and go and have a read through the notes there. If you can't find it, just go down to the most recent posts, go onto the right margin, and you'll find it there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining Patreon, the TCRS page on Patreon. Be sure to share this with people that are interested in the case. And thank you very much for your patronage. Look out for the video on YouTube covering the first use of the term standoffish in the Watts narrative. Thank you for listening, and we'll see each other again tomorrow.